Welcome back to the Sense Check Lab, where we put everyday common sense and trending hype to the test. I'm N, and I'm here with my co-host, M.
Hey everyone.
Today, we're brewing up a hot topic, literally. We're talking all about coffee. Is it a health hero or a slow killer?
And for this deep dive, we've pulled together a stack of sources provided by one of our listeners. We've got research papers breaking down coffee's chemistry,
Right.
looking at health links like diabetes and fractures, and articles discussing things like caffeine sensitivity, dependence, and dosage guidelines.
Our mission today is really to sift through all of this information. It feels like everyone has a strong opinion on coffee. Either it's the absolute best thing, essential for health.
Or it's terrible for you.
Exactly. Or it's this dangerous drug we should all avoid. So what we want to find out is what the actual research says, trying to get a clear picture of what's in that cup and its potential effects on your health.
Yeah, can something so common, so universally consumed, really be both incredibly good for you and potentially harmful?
That's the big question, isn't it? Let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And I think to understand coffee's effects, we first have to look at what it actually is, chemically speaking.
Yeah.
Because beyond just that amazing roasted bean smell we all know, coffee beans are incredibly complex little chemical factories, really.
Right. So it's more than just brown stuff that smells good.
Yeah.
What exactly are we drinking then?
Well, quite a lot, actually. The major players include caffeine, of course. That's the stimulant we usually think of.
The main one, yeah.
And it brings some of that bitter taste. But you also have chlorogenic acids. These contribute to the coffee's acidity,
Okay.
but they're also powerful antioxidants.
Okay. Antioxidants, that sounds generally positive, right?
Generally, yes. Then there are lipids or fats. These are actually crucial for the mouthfeel, the body of the coffee and how the aroma is released.
Interesting.
And carbohydrates and proteins are really key because during roasting, they undergo the Maillard reaction.
The Maillard reaction, like when searing meat.
Kind of similar, yeah. It's that complex browning process that develops, well, hundreds of coffee's flavor compounds and gives it that rich color.
So roasting isn't just like burning the beans. It's a specific chemical transformation that's creating flavor.
Precisely. And speaking of flavor, there are loads of volatile compounds, things like furans and pyrazines. These are the tiny molecules that create those specific aromas, whether you get fruity, floral, nutty, or even those smoky notes.
That's the artistry of coffee brewing, I suppose, getting those notes out.
It really is.
Right.
And then you have the non-volatile compounds, things like minerals, potassium, magnesium. They actually affect how the coffee brews.
Right.
Melanoidins, also formed during roasting, contribute to the color and body, but they also have antioxidant properties.
More antioxidants.
And another one is trigonelline. It adds bitterness, but it actually gets converted to niacin, that's vitamin B3, during the roasting process.
Wow. Okay. It really is a complex mix of chemistry in just one cup.
Yeah.
Does this mix change much, say, depending on the type of coffee bean?
Oh, significantly, yeah. The sources really highlight the big difference in caffeine content between the two main coffee species people drink, Arabica and Robusta.
Okay.
Arabica beans are generally around, say, 1.2% caffeine by weight, but Robusta beans, they're almost double that, roughly 2.2% caffeine.
Wow. Okay. So that definitely explains why a shot of espresso made with Robusta can hit you so much harder than like an Arabica pour-over.
Exactly. It's a noticeable difference. And beyond just the bean type, the final chemical makeup in your cup is influenced by, well, everything.
Yeah.
How the beans were processed after picking, fermentation, drying methods,
Right.
the roasting level, obviously, and even environmental factors where they were grown. It all plays a part.
So given this incredible complexity, let's turn to the health side of things. We always hear about coffee boosting energy, obviously, but the research seems to point to some maybe less obvious but more significant health connections. What did the sources reveal as the most supported health benefit?
Yeah, this was interesting. One of the most consistent and I'd say compelling links found in the research we looked at is between habitual coffee consumption, so drinking it regularly over time, and a lower risk of type 2 diabetes.
Okay, type 2 diabetes. And that's from large studies following people.
Exactly. Large prospective studies, which track people over many years, repeatedly show this association.
So basically, regular coffee drinkers seem less likely to develop type 2 diabetes down the line.
That's the core finding, yeah. And it's not a small or, inconsistent thing. This association appears dose-dependent.
Meaning more coffee, lower risk. Within limits, I assume?
Generally, yes. The more you habitually drink within moderate limits, the lower the risk seems to be. And it's observed consistently across really diverse populations, different regions, sexes, ages, weights, even smokers versus non-smokers.
That sounds like a pretty strong statistical link. But the big question always is it just correlation or is there a proposed mechanism? Like, why might this happen? Is it just about caffeine helping with metabolism right after you drink it?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating, and it was a key insight from the sources. The proposed mechanism isn't primarily about coffee causing an immediate, acute change in your blood sugar or insulin levels.
Oh, okay. So it's not that quick fix.
No. Instead, the research suggests that coffee's various phytochemicals, those plant compounds we talked about, trigger a long-term adaptive cellular response.
Adaptive cellular response.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
Think of it like coffee components essentially training your cells over time to build up their defenses and improve their repair mechanisms.
Wait, hang on. So it's not just giving you a temporary buzz. It might actually be helping your cells become more resilient in the long run.
Yeah.
That's a totally different way to think about coffee.
It really is. The research points specifically to the activation of certain cellular systems like NRF2 keep 1 and AHR.
Yeah.
These are basically your cell's internal alarm systems.
Okay.
When they get activated, they switch on genes that produce protective proteins. And the key areas where this protective effect seems to happen are the liver and the beta cells in the pancreas.
Okay. Why specifically those two organs?
Well, the liver is a major site where many of these coffee compounds accumulate after you digest them.
Makes sense.
And the sources suggest these compounds can improve how your liver processes fats, which could reduce the risk of fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. They seem to do this by boosting mitochondrial function.
The cell's power plants?
Exactly, the energy factories. And also boosting processes like autophagy.
Autophagy.
Yeah.
That's the cell's cleanup brew, right? Getting rid of damaged stuff.
You got it. It's the cell's way of cleaning out damaged components. So improving how the liver handles fat and cleaning up cellular junk seems pretty fundamental for overall metabolic health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What about the beta cells? They make insulin, right?
Correct. They're in the pancreas responsible for producing insulin. For these cells, activating those defense pathways we mentioned seems to protect them from stress, specifically damage caused by high levels of sugar and fat, something called glucolipotoxicity.
Okay, so protection from overload.
Yeah. And some coffee components might also prevent the clumping of misfolded proteins like proinsulin or amylin that can kind of gum up the works inside the beta cells and impair their function over time.
So it's like protecting the insulin factories from both stress damage and this sort of protein junk buildup. That makes sense.
That's a great way to put it. And the research points to specific compounds like chlorogenic acid, those melanoidins from roasting, and certain pyridine derivatives as being involved in these protective effects.
Right.
So the key takeaway here is really that coffee's potential benefit for type 2 diabetes isn't about a quick blood sugar fix after your morning cup. It seems to be a long game, played out through these complex cellular defense and repair mechanisms that build up over time with habitual consumption.
Okay, wow. So coffee as a potential long-term cellular protector, especially against diabetes, that's a pretty powerful potential benefit.
Wow.
But we have to look at the flip side, right? The slow killer possibility we mentioned at the start. What risks or controversies did the sources highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. The research definitely points to potential downsides and situations where coffee might not be beneficial or could even be harmful, depending on the person. One really common concern that came up in the sources is, unsurprisingly, anxiety.
And that feels especially relevant today, doesn't it? With anxiety disorders seeming to be on the rise globally.
It really is, and we know caffeine is a stimulant primarily because it blocks adenosine receptors in your brain.
Right, adenosine makes you sleepy.
Exactly. Adenosine normally builds up and makes you feel tired. Blocking those receptors, especially the main inhibitory ones, increases alertness, which is often what we want. But it can also ramp up nerve activity in a way that leads to anxiety for some people. There was a meta-analysis mentioned that looked specifically at caffeine intake and anxiety.
And what did it find? Is there a definite link?
Well, it found a small overall association, suggesting a link. But, and this is a big but, the same analysis noted high heterogeneity between the studies they looked at.
Heterogeneity.
Yeah.
Meaning the results were kind of all over the place.
Pretty much. The effect wasn't consistent and varied a lot between different studies and populations. This points really strongly towards individual differences being absolutely key here.
Okay.
In fact, genetic variations, particularly in a gene called ADORAT2A, which affects one of those adenosine
Right,
receptors,
you mentioned that.
yeah, that variation is specifically mentioned as influencing how much anxiety caffeine might trigger in a particular person.
Ah, okay. So some people are basically genetically predisposed to feel more wired and anxious from the same amount of coffee than others.
That seems to be the leading hypothesis, yes. And it makes sense anecdotally too, right? We all know people who can't handle much coffee. And the sources did note that higher coffee consumption has been linked to increased anxiety, particularly in certain groups, like young adult males in some studies.
Okay, so anxiety is a potential risk,
Yeah.
definitely linked to individual sensitivity and how much you drink. What about more physical risks? Like I've heard things about bone health.
Yes, that came up too. The sources included another meta-analysis, a big one, pooling data from over 200,000 people, specifically examining coffee consumption and the risk of fractures.
200,000 people, that's a lot. What did that massive study find?
Overall, it found a slightly increased risk of fracture. The number they came up with was about 3.5% higher risk for each additional cup of coffee consumed per day, on average.
Okay. A small increase per cup. But is that the whole picture? Was it the same for everyone?
No, not quite. And this was maybe one of the most notable findings. There was a significant difference by sex.
Oh, how so?
While there was this suggested higher risk overall, driven largely by the results in women, there was actually a lower risk, or even potentially a protective effect, observed for men in this particular analysis.
Wow, that's a really striking difference between men and women. Do they know why that might be?
Well, the proposed mechanisms are still being explored. The thinking is that caffeine might affect calcium balance in the body. It could potentially increase how much calcium you lose in urine and feces, and maybe decrease how much calcium your gut absorbs from food. There might also be direct effects on bone tissue itself, or maybe even subtle influences on things like balance that could increase the risk of falling, especially in older adults.
I see.
However, and this is really crucial to point out, the authors of that meta-analysis themselves included a big caveat. Despite their findings, they stated pretty clearly that the current data is insufficient to draw a convincing conclusion.
Ah, okay, so
Then-
not definitive yet.
Not definitive, and they also pointed out potential issues that could affect the results, like publication bias, where studies showing an effect are more likely to get published than those showing no effect.
Got it. So it's kind of a potential red flag, maybe especially for women consuming higher amounts, but the science isn't really settled on the fracture risk yet.
Exactly. It's a potential risk that definitely needs more investigation. And then, of course, we also need to mention the more common immediate side effects of just consuming too much caffeine for your system or simply being more sensitive to it.
Right, the classic caffeine jitters.
Yeah, exactly. The sources list the usual suspects. Headaches, maybe insomnia or difficulty sleeping, nervousness, irritability, frequent urination,
Yep.
a fast heartbeat, and even muscle tremor sometimes.
We've probably all felt some of those at some point if we overdid it.
Probably. And it's important to know this isn't usually a true allergy, but rather your body's individual response based on how efficiently you process caffeine and your inherent sensitivity level.
And are there specific groups of people where the risks are clearer or the recommendations are different?
Yes, definitely. Several sources were clear on specific guidance for certain groups. For kids and teenagers, the American Academy of Pediatrics advises against them having multiple caffeinated drinks
Why is that?
because of potential side effects like increased heart rate and blood pressure, sleep disturbances, mood swings, even acid reflux. Plus, we just don't really know the long-term effects of regular caffeine intake on their developing nervous and cardiovascular systems.
Right, better safe than sorry there. Good advice for parents.
Absolutely. And for pregnant or breastfeeding women, the general guideline is to limit caffeine intake to less than 200 milligrams per day.
Okay.
Higher levels have been associated in some studies with potential issues like low birth weight and maybe premature labor. It's always best practice to discuss caffeine intake with a doctor during pregnancy.
Makes sense.
And one more serious warning that came up. Highly concentrated powdered or liquid caffeine products. These can be extremely toxic and potentially lethal. Even in small amounts, they're definitely not the same as having a cup of coffee.
Okay, so the risks are definitely real for some people, especially at higher doses, and there are clear warnings for children and pregnant women. This really underscores that idea that timing, dosage, and just who you are matter a whole lot with coffee. How do these individual factors really play out?
They're absolutely central. You can't really talk about coffee's effects without talking about individual differences. The general guidelines suggest that up to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day is considered safe for most healthy adults.
And 400 milligrams is roughly how much coffee? Like 4 cups.
Roughly, yeah, around 4 standard 8-ounce cups of brewed coffee. But even that varies wildly depending on the type of bean, the roast, the brewing method. A single coffee shop espresso can have 75 milligrams or more, while a big mug of strong drip coffee could easily top 200 milligrams.
Right, so 4 cups is just a rough guide.
Very rough. And as we've discussed, most healthy adults isn't everyone. Those guidelines change for specific groups.
Like pregnant women.
Right, for pregnant or breastfeeding women, the recommendation drops to less than 200 milligrams per day. And for people with hypersensitivity, which is a recognized category, not just feeling a bit jittery, even small amounts, maybe 30, 50 milligrams, which is less than half a cup of regular coffee, can cause significant, unpleasant, and long-lasting symptoms. Those individuals might need to avoid caffeine almost entirely.
Wow. And kids.
Yeah, for children and adolescents, there aren't specific numerical guidelines like the 400 milligrams for adults, but the strong recommendation is definitely for limitation or avoidance.
So this sensitivity thing, it's not just about feeling jittery sometimes. It sounds like it's more of a spectrum with a real biological basis.
Exactly right. The sources describe the spectrum quite well. You've got normal sensitivity, where someone can handle maybe up to that 400 milligrams a day without major issues. Then there's hyposensitivity.
Hypo, meaning less sensitive.
Yes, less sensitive. These are people who, often due to genetics, can drink large amounts of coffee, maybe even late in the day, with minimal effects on sleep or mood.
Okay.
And then at the other end, you have hypersensitivity, where even very small doses cause intense symptoms that can last for hours.
And you mentioned genetics playing a role there. What specific factors make someone more or less sensitive?
Genetics seems to play a huge role. We already touched on variations in genes like ADORA2A, the adenosine receptor gene, which influences how your brain responds to caffeine.
Right, the anxiety link.
Yeah. And another key genetic factor affects how quickly your liver produces a specific enzyme called CYP1A2.
CYP1A2.
That's the main enzyme responsible for metabolizing or breaking down caffeine in your body. If your genes mean you produce less of this enzyme or a slower acting version.
Caffeine hangs around longer.
Exactly. Caffeine stays in your system much longer and its effects are amplified and prolonged. That's often the biological basis for hypersensitivity.
So our biology really stacks the deck differently for each of us when it comes to coffee.
Absolutely. Your genetics heavily influence how you experience caffeine. Habitual use also plays a part, though. People who don't drink coffee regularly tend to be more sensitive to its effects than daily drinkers whose bodies have adapted somewhat.
That makes sense. Tolerance builds up.
It does. And just on a practical note, timing matters too. Even if you metabolize caffeine relatively quickly, the sources remind us that drinking it too late in the day, even in the afternoon for some people, can still significantly disrupt your sleep quality later that night.
Okay, we've covered side effects and sensitivity, but the sources also brought up the topic of dependence. Can coffee or caffeine really actually be addictive? Is that the right word?
That's a really important question, and it's crucial to distinguish between just having a habit and having an actual addiction. The sources we looked at helped clarify this.
Okay. How did they define the difference?
Well, a habit is generally described as a routine behavior, something often done automatically, maybe unconsciously, but it's usually under your control. You can change it with effort.
Like brushing your teeth or maybe checking your phone first thing?
Exactly. Or having that morning cup of coffee. It might involve some psychological dependence, you feel like you need it, but the overall risk associated with the habit is generally low.
Okay, so my routine morning cup is probably just a habit for me.
Initially, for most people, yes. Addiction, on the other hand, is defined very differently. It's characterized by a compulsive need for something, a substance or behavior that continues despite clear harmful consequences.
Okay, that sounds much more serious.
It is. Addiction typically involves both a psychological and often a physical inability to stop. It changes the brain's reward pathways, often requires professional help to overcome, and it starts to dominate your behavior.
So it disrupts your life.
Yes, it disrupts life, leads to withdrawal symptoms if you try to stop, and carries much higher risks impacting health, finances, relationships, work, even legal issues sometimes. Denial can also be a factor.
Okay, that's a clear difference. So where does caffeine fit in? Is it just a habit, or can it cross that line?
Well, caffeine dependence is a recognized clinical condition. It's in diagnostic manuals. And sources indicate that consuming as little as 100 milligrams of caffeine per day.
That's only about one standard cup of coffee.
I know, right? Just 100 milligrams per day can be enough to lead to physical dependence in some individuals.
Wow, 1 cup. That's surprisingly low threshold for physical dependence.
It really shows how readily our bodies can adapt physically. And if you are physically dependent and then you suddenly stop or significantly cut back your intake, that's when you can experience withdrawal symptoms.
Right, the dreaded caffeine headache.
That's the classic one. But the sources list others too. Significant fatigue, irritability, real difficulty concentrating, muscle aches or stiffness, and sometimes even nausea or vomiting or a depressed mood.
Yikes, those sound pretty unpleasant. How long do they last?
They typically start about 12 to 24 hours after your last caffeine dose, tend to peak around 20 to 48 hours, so day 1 or 2 are often the worst, but they can linger for up to 9 days in some cases.
9 days.
Yeah, it can take a while for your body to fully readjust. And while a daily coffee might start as just a habit for most people, the sources do caution that a habit can subtly transition into a more problematic dependence, or even something closer to addiction, especially in vulnerable individuals or perhaps at very high doses.
Are there warning signs to look out for that maybe it's becoming more than just a habit?
Yes, the sources mention some warning signs, things like finding you can't stop or cut down even if you genuinely want to, spending excessive time thinking about obtaining or using caffeine, maybe neglecting responsibilities at work or home because of it, using caffeine specifically to cope with or escape from problems, and experiencing significant distress or impairment from the withdrawal symptoms if you do try to stop.
Okay, so understanding that whole spectrum, from habit to dependence, and recognizing those warning signs is really important. For someone listening who maybe experiences some negative effects or just wants to cut back on their coffee or caffeine intake, what practical, actionable tips do the sources provide?
Yeah, the sources offered some good practical strategies depending on what your goal is. First, if you just want to manage your intake better, the advice is to really keep tabs on how much caffeine you're actually consuming.
Right, know your numbers.
Exactly, because it's not just coffee, right? Check teas, sodas, energy drinks, chocolate, even some over-the-counter pain relievers or cold medicines can have caffeine. Reading labels is really key.
Awareness is always the first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. Then, if you actively want to reduce your intake, the best approach, according to the sources, is gradual reduction. Don't just stop cold turkey, especially if you drink a lot.
Why not? Just because of the withdrawal.
Yeah, mainly to avoid or lessen those potentially severe withdrawal symptoms we just talked about. The advice is to cut back slowly. Maybe reduce by 1 cup a day or switch to a smaller size cup for a while.
Okay.
Or you could try mixing regular coffee with decaf, gradually increasing the proportion of decaf, before eventually switching entirely if that's your goal.
That sounds like a much gentler way to do it, a slow taper.
Exactly. It makes the withdrawal much milder, often barely noticeable for some people. Switching to decaf entirely is a great option too, because you still get the ritual, the flavor profile you enjoy, just without the caffeine kick.
Right.
If you're reducing tea, brewing it for a shorter amount of time can also help cut the caffeine content. And like I said, check those medications if you take pain relievers regularly, see if they contain caffeine and switch to caffeine-free versions if needed. These are all good strategies for managing a strong habit or maybe a mild dependence.
Okay, that makes sense for cutting back. But what if someone feels like their relationship with coffee or caffeine is impacting their life more significantly? Maybe bordering on what we described as addiction with those warning signs.
Right. For situations involving more significant dependence, or when those warning signs of addiction seem to be present, the sources suggest strategies that are often used in managing other types of substance dependence.
Such as?
Well, the gradual dose tapering we just mentioned is still a primary strategy, but other approaches might include things like trying intermittent fasting, which can sometimes help reset habits and structure periods without caffeine. Diligently monitoring your intake through journaling can increase awareness and accountability.
Right.
Incorporating regular exercise is often recommended, as it can help boost mood and energy levels naturally, potentially reducing the perceived need for caffeine. But critically, for more ingrained dependence or addiction-like patterns, seeking professional help is often advised.
Professional help like therapy.
Yes, specifically mentioning things like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. That's a type of talk therapy that's very effective at helping people identify and change the negative thought patterns and behaviors that underlie dependence or addiction. It addresses the deeper psychological aspects.
So addiction, in that more clinical sense, often requires more structured treatment and expert guidance than just willpower alone.
That's generally the view, yes. The approach really depends on whether it's a manageable habit, a physical dependence causing some issues, or a more severe pattern that's significantly impacting life. The more severe, the more likely professional support is needed.
Got it. That's a really helpful breakdown of strategies.
And just to quickly echo those important warnings again, based on the sources, pregnant or breastfeeding women really should aim for under 200 milligrams of caffeine per day and definitely consult their doctor.
Right?
And parents, be mindful of caffeine limits for kids and teens. Limiting or avoiding is generally best practice.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground. We've dug into the intricate chemistry of coffee, explored the potential cellular benefits, particularly regarding type 2 diabetes. We've discussed the debated risks like anxiety and fractures, highlighted the absolutely critical role of individual factors like genetics and sensitivity.
Yeah, huge factor.
And we've talked about the spectrum from habit to physical dependence and potential withdrawal. So let's try and circle back to our original big question. Pulling all of this together, based on these sources, is coffee ultimately a health hero or more of a slow killer?
Well, I think the clearest message from synthesizing all these sources is that there's no simple universal yes or no answer. It's just not that black and white. Coffee is incredibly chemically complex, as we saw.
Right, hundreds of compounds, not just caffeine. Definitely not a single ingredient story.
Not at all. And its effects reflect that complexity. On the hero side, the evidence seems strongest, or at least most consistently reported in these sources, for a link between habitual coffee consumption and that lower risk of type 2 diabetes. And the proposed mechanism involving long-term cellular defense and repair in the liver and pancreas is pretty compelling. It suggests a potentially significant protective effect over time for many people.
Okay, so that's a strong point in the hero column.
Mhm.
What about the other side?
Well, on the killer, or maybe more accurately, the proceed with caution side, there are those potential links to increased anxiety. That seems particularly relevant for individuals with specific genetic sensitivities or simply those consuming high doses relative to their tolerance.
Right, the anxiety factor.
Then there's the suggested increased risk of fractures, especially highlighted for women and with higher consumption levels, although, again, with that important caveat from the researchers themselves that the evidence isn't considered definitive or convincing just yet.
Okay, so a potential risk, but maybe still a question mark.
A bit of a question mark, yeah. And then the potential for physical dependence is definitely real.
Even at relatively low daily intakes, as you said.
Exactly. Physical dependence can develop even at moderate intake levels, like that 1 cup a day, leading to those potentially quite unpleasant withdrawal symptoms if you stop suddenly. And finally, there are those specific risks for vulnerable groups, children, teenagers, pregnant women, where intake should definitely be limited or avoided based on current recommendations.
So when you weigh it all up, the truth seems to be it really, really depends on you. Your personal biology, your habits, your overall health situation.
That is absolutely the key takeaway from synthesizing these sources. Coffee's effects are highly individual. It's this complex balance of potential benefits versus potential risks, and that balance is heavily influenced by your unique genetics, how sensitive you are, how quickly your body metabolizes caffeine, the amount you choose to drink, the timing, and your overall health context. It's not inherently good or bad across the board.
It's more about our personal interaction with this incredibly complex and popular beverage. That completely reframes the question, doesn't it? It's less about coffee's fixed destiny to be a hero or a villain, and much more about how our unique biology and our choices interact with it. So maybe here's a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to mull over as you perhaps finish, or maybe consider, your next cup. Given how significantly factors like our genetics and our individual metabolism influence our sensitivity and reaction to coffee, does this mean our relationship with this complex beverage is mostly predetermined by our biology? Or can we still consciously navigate its effects by truly understanding our own bodies and making informed choices about when and how much we consume? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into coffee. We hope you learned something new. Maybe you'll even savor your next cup a little more. Don't forget to share your coffee habits and questions with us on social media. And join us next time on the Sense Check Lab when we tackle another trending topic. Maybe that mysterious world of adaptogens, or perhaps the truth about plant-based meats.
Until then, stay curious and keep questioning the hype.